Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome again. Municipal Services Project. For a project, I think we've kind of exceeded our mandate. We see lots of people here, and certainly the last 2 days, or 2.5 days, is, I think, been very exciting for me and for my co-director David, and I hope also for yourself. It's rare to get such a combination of different sectors of society, different interests. If you walk into one panel or one of the sessions and walk out into another, you just traveled several continents. The scale of the struggles, whether it's national, local, whether it involves churches, I think we were able to capture that richness. And if anybody asks me where is the central focus of struggle in the world today, I wouldn't be able to answer that question, because what became very apparent is that people are organizing everywhere. And so if we had to capture the spirit of this last 2.5 days, it's that we can look anywhere, even in smaller spaces, for alternatives. The alternative isn't some big thing. It's what's happening in a small little village in Uganda, or a big city like Cape Town, or even New York. I think the idea of a cosmopolitan imaginary, idea of thinking as a global person, as a global activist, I think this is what's come through in this last 2.5 days. I only have 15 minutes. I'm going to try and race through my presentation. I want to start with a picture. A very short talk that I've conjured up for the next few minutes. I've titled Visible and Invisible Publics in South Africa. And I think one of the key issues in the struggle today is to make ourselves visible. Apartheid is a remarkable exercise in spatial engineering, and the poor and black people in particular were made invisible. And for the last 20 years we've been trying to push ourselves, as it were, into the public arena. And what you see happening in South Africa with these service delivery protests every day, we have a protest, is an attempt by the poor who've been silenced and been marginalized to make themselves visible. So just about 2-3 months ago, people took feces, the politics of shit, as somebody mentioned in one of the sessions, took buckets of stuff and deposited some of it in the airport so the tourists and everybody else could see what it's like. I think the idea that the poor are some sort of category of people living in carnage, I think that's been dispelled. We need to take over the idea of transgressive spatial action, of moving out of our normal places. This is a form of power. Power is the ability to be out of place, to be in the wrong place at the right time. That is power. So that is really the project, is to rethink the spaces of engagement and the spaces of appearance, because in the end, public citizenship means the ability to stand up in a meeting like this and not feel shame. And in South Africa, we haven't reached that point. If you look at the next slide, you will see what I mean by South African micro-politics, the micro-politics of the public, the everyday politics of living in a township. And when white people go into a township in South Africa, the local people always think that they're foreigners, and in fact, little children start to cry. Kids cry because they haven't seen any white people in their township. Generally, the people who come into black townships are regarded as people from another planet. That's how far we have to go in South Africa to rebuild this country. We have, at the same time as the spaces of confinement, these areas called townships, are still alive and actively reproduced through service delivery. It's a bizarre paradox that the ANC provides services, but also re-inscribes apartheid, because the services go to exactly the same places where we used to stay. So for the MSP, it's not a question of we want more services. We want services, but not in the same ghettos where we always used to live. We're not about, the project isn't about gilding the ghetto. It's about new spaces, new kinds of social interactions between people, mixing of the classes, the middle class, the working class shouldn't live in separate areas. For us, that is the new public. And so you can see the title of this panel is The Publics of South Africa, the different publics. And so we have a long, long way to overcome that problem. But that problem in itself will never go away until we tackle the bigger problem of private property, which is one of the unfortunate things that we've negotiated ourselves into this mess. Our constitution is very strong on private property rights. So until we actually tackle the political economy of space, there's very little hope of talking about a public domain in South Africa, because we'll forever be separated socially and geographically in our separate spaces. White people, rich people, and about 10% of black people now, 10% of black people have moved into former white areas, the new black bourgeoisie, the ANC, top parliamentarians, the big business elite. They live with the white side. But 99% of people who are black are still living in the same places they lived 20 years ago. And these areas where the whites live now are highly securitized, with the number of private security agencies. There's something like 900,000 little companies and big companies that secure the lives of the rich. The rich people do not go to public hospitals. They don't go to public. They don't interact with the state. When they want something from the state, they outsource it to a little company who goes and organizes it for them. They go to malls, which are, you don't see poor people. So we're living in different spaces, different circuits in South Africa, and this is something we're going to have to fight about. And so I'll give you another little picture. The people who actually do go into townships are actually foreigners, tourists. And those two individuals are actually tourists. And they wanted to understand South Africa, so they went and lived in a black family in Pretoria. And they were insulted and condemned, and they were told by other white people, what are you trying to prove, And they said, look, the only way you're really going to get to understand South Africa is by experiencing and living in the same space. And this is what they've done. And both of them are academics. I think the one chap's an engineer, and ate together with people, which I think isn't a bad idea. Because if you don't have a common fate, if your life is not at risk because you live such a safe life somewhere else, how possibly can you get yourself to think, about a new South Africa? Your positionality, your standpoint is very important. So I'm going to go on and tell you what I made at the conference. And a couple of things popping into some of the sessions. I didn't go to all of them because it's very difficult to split into 3 parts. But one of the things that struck me in some of the questions from the floor, when people ask questions, there's a sense that when you talk in a public space, you can't be emotional. Because public discourse, in this sort of Habermas tradition, you've got to be rational and put your points and argue. But what about screaming? How about screaming as a form of argument in a public domain? I think there's a lot to be said for hysteria and screaming. And I'm all in favor of emotional forms of discourse. And swearing even, if you want to say, to the ruling class. Because in Cape Town, that's how our politics works. We swear a lot in Cape Town, and most of the comrades from the areas in Cape Town, the townships, the ghettos, but if they were speaking, they'd say your master and your pastor and so on. See my colleague, because swearing and just the language that we use in class politics, in ordinary people's language, I think that's very important, and they are excluded from the public. Because they are rendered silent, they become voiceless because they cannot speak English. So that to me is a problem. Just the languages we use, how we give people access through their own particularities. We tend to think of the public as a universal sort of category where we look at everybody's interest. And in fact, the MSP is a bit guilty of that as well. We have a slogan called services for all, but maybe that needs to be complemented with more services for others. The notion that you treat everybody the same, I think, is a false idea. So it's not quite services for all, it's more services for the poor, for the working class. So also the notion of the city, I think, is very important. It's come up a lot. People want to engage with the local state. And how exactly do you do that? What is the scale? Is it a little local forum, or is it something bigger? And how do you organize coalitions of forces across the city? The question of providing spaces for difference and not looking for mechanical unity or ultimatums. You know, we have a lot of ultimatums that the unions need to do the following. SAICA didn't do this, UMSA this, that, the APF that. You know, we always sort of tend to shout each other down, and there's a politics of ultimatism. You know, you need to do. But in fact, one of the speakers said we need a politics of dialogue and engagement, and not of mechanical uniformity and homogenization. I mean, that's a big word. We need a politics where difference can be understood and we can live with difference. We don't have to all agree with each other. We have to act together against the common enemy. But we don't have to suddenly all agree with everyone's politics. I think that's never going to happen. It's inscribed in the very nature of capitalism that we have different experiences, different tempos of struggle in different parts of the world. So there's no way we can harmonize things. That's a wrong premise for proper politics. And then I want to say, don't drive away the middle class. I've been accused in the past of sort of being soft on the middle class, but we're not. The politics of the working class isn't an exclusive sectarian pursuit. The working class, certainly from my point of view, is a leading class. It leads other classes. It's got to lead the middle class. So if we're talking about health, what are we offering the middle class? Should they go to the private hospital and, you know, I think we're looking for universal forms of services that also include the middle class, break the middle class away from its attachment to the neoliberal project. I'm going to move on a little bit to my next point. We've heard also quite a lot about the trade unions and the UMSA movement, but there have also been other moments, the Marikana moment and what we could probably even call the NUM moment, because NUM is the big mine workers union, and something happened there, they lost their members. People must remember that unions are not singular organizations, they're internal battles. The workers, the mine workers have walked away from their leadership. That was an immense act. Just as we've heard, UMSA has done all this stuff, but there were mine workers who joined another union. They formed another union. And so the idea that there's certain unions that are with us and there are others that are not with us is a simplistic idea. UMSA is the big. But there are other workers in Kusatu that are also struggling, and just their union leaders haven't made the break. So never use these simplistic categories. You know, there are some good unions, there are some sub-out unions. They're unions, and the unions have their internal dynamics, just as all our community groups have internal issues that we're fighting. So we can easily get ourselves trapped into sectarian mode if we start using blanket condemnation or blanket appraisals of organizations and not look at the internal dynamics. So even now, we don't leave Niau out of the picture. We invited Niau here because apparently the unions that are teachers' unions, Niau, they're not as good as UMSA. Well, that's a wrong position. You know, we want to engage with everybody. Wherever there are workers, if the workers go to church, we go to church. You know? Our attitude is not some kind of political purism. We go where the people are. And a lot of our activity, a lot of our research actually is also about faith-based movements. In Uganda, we've done a lot of work on looking at health facilities done by Muslim groups, Christian groups. I also want to just maybe end, because time is going on, with a quote from David Harvey, because he has come up before. And David Harvey, in his book called Rebel Cities, writes the following. He says, and this is in relation to what I would call a kind of workers' state. If you recall, the Paris Commune was the first attempt at a workers' government anywhere in the world in the 1870s. And the first two things that the Paris Commune, the edicts or laws that were passed, were, the first one was they abolished night work in bakeries, which was a labor question. So here's a workers' government taking on an issue of production, the labor question. The second thing they did was to impose a moratorium on rents, housing rent, and urban questions. I think for me the central struggle here is how to bring those two spheres of production, so question of workers in factories, how to bring the power of workers who produce the city, who produce services, who work in the mines, the farms and so on, how to bring those people into a conversation urban questions like housing, water, and so on. And I just wanted to say that in South Africa, we are at a special moment, and I think some of the speakers here are certainly going to talk to that. So I don't want to pick that up, but I certainly feel that we are at a unique moment, and it's a great conference, a great time to have a conference, and yeah, I'm really thankful. I will say a few words at the end after this, just to officially thank you. So, but thank you in the meanwhile.